Hello friends. I gave the following talk at a recent gathering of the Psychedelic Society of London on the topic of plant spirits and DMT entities. Some people weren't able to be there and asked if I might record it again. So here we go. Plant spirits and DMT entities. Not the easiest topic to get into without some people thinking you're struggling to re-emerge from the deep cosmic rabbit hole. Nonetheless, it's a topic close to my heart and one that's worthwhile openly sharing about. There are many ways of altering our states of consciousness. Dance, meditation, drumming and other sound work, or by ingesting sacred medicines such as DMT, Psilocybin mushrooms, or Ayahuasca. My greatest teachers have been the internal realms that these medicines grant access to. Sources of knowledge and healing accessible to all. It is my experience that these medicines can be vehicles to allow us to connect to a consciousness that is both seemingly outside of ourselves and that we are also an aspect of. People have been labelling that consciousness throughout human history, putting their own perception of it into words to try to share and understand their experiences, often proclaiming that they know, that they have the answer. If there's one thing I've understood from my explorations of altered states, it is that my understanding of the infinitely complex nature of the universe and the human experience is like a grain of sand on a vast beach of knowledge. I'm also aware that once something is labelled, be that as a plant spirit, DMT entity, God consciousness or the divine, it's a slippery slope towards giving that label a personality, which can be more to do with me and my ego rather than furthering an understanding of that consciousness. The whole thing is full of potholes. We're dancing over them, falling in the process, and that's okay. Between 1990 and 95, at the University of New Mexico's School of Medicine, Dr. Rick Strassman administered approximately 400 doses of DMT to 60 human volunteers. He described the volunteers' DMT experiences as fitting into three general categories. 1. Personal. These were psychologically orientated sessions in which volunteers dealt primarily with their own histories, often yielding deeper awareness and acceptance of difficult personal issues. 2. Transpersonal. These sessions went beyond the individual's historical life experience, but consisted of familiar building blocks. Mystical and near-death experiences fall into this category. 3. Invisible worlds. My favourite. These comprised encounters with what seemed to be freestanding, autonomous realities that coexisted with our reality. Sometimes such realms appeared inhabited by alien beings that were more or less aware of the volunteers and were able to interact with them to varying degrees. Strassman describes how sessions were not solely one type or another. A mystical or near-death experience may have been preceded by encounters with beings, or a deeply personal, psychologically cathartic session might have led to mystical or spiritual insights or experiences. Personally, I find these categories overlap more often than not. What Strassman chose to refer to as realms appearing to be inhabited by alien beings is partially what I'd like to discuss. I've certainly found that those realms are inhabited by a consciousness, presenting in a variety of forms, though I prefer to use other terminology instead of alien beings. Strassman writes about beings that were able to interact with the volunteers to varying degrees. he reported that over 50% of the volunteers had contact with these beings. So it was more likely than not for people to experience these connections. Whether we label what they're connecting to as beings, or Mother Ayahuasca, or machine elves, I definitely feel like that consciousness is willing to get into dialogues and to offer teaching and healing. I thought I would share one DMT experience I had which predominantly fits into the transpersonal category, but within which there is also guidance from what I perceive as a consciousness outside of myself. Releasing a long, slow breath, smoke from the DMT pipe curled from my lips as the familiar high-pitched buzzing vibrated through my body. The room around me dissolved into fractal patterns of energy as I was catapulted into four-dimensional geometric landscapes. My sense of time dissolved as I popped through intersecting visions of countless key moments from my life. A sort of fractal life map. I was flooded with an awareness of the perfection of each moment. The pain and joy equally necessary for the lessons they reap. The visions were accompanied by a dialogue with a consciousness I refer to as the divine, but which could be interpreted as the spirit of that medicine. In the tone of a wise, compassionate teacher, I was told, "You are either coming from love or fear. Let go of your fear. You seek this experience, so embrace it." As I felt the construct of Jamie, my identity, falling away from me. My narrative, this person I think I am, this gay, married man who enjoys dancing and painting and chocolate, who's influenced by all the life occurrences that construct a sense of who I imagine myself to be. That identity became separate from the awareness that at the core, I am purely a tiny cell within the body that is the source of all that is. One of billions of energetic aspects of that. It was a deep, all-encompassing experience of the oneness and connectivity between us all. And in all honesty, I felt utterly overwhelmed. It's fun to flirt with the edge, but the further you go beyond that, fun isn't the word for it. Sensory experience beyond language. It felt as though within the seams of that experience was all human experience, an unending trough of love and fiery rushes of fear, arising from deep within, there, and then swept away by the next dive or climb of this cosmic visionary roller coaster. Fear arose, and then the awareness of the irrelevance of fear pushed it aside. I don't know how long I remained lost to any reference of self, merged with that transcendent energy. I know that at some point, I became aware of self enough to think, Jamie has obviously died. That is what this experience is. I've had a few other occasions during visionary states where a similar thought process has occurred. Though more commonly I've thought, how am I ever going to come back from this? How will I ever be able to return to so-called normal life? But of course, you do come back. And what is normal life? Life is different every day. And these experiences add to our ever-shifting perception of the human experience. the state of ego disillusionment is so intense that when you begin to return from that, it's understandable that you think you've died. On this occasion, on perceiving that, I was posed the question by that divine teacher: did you have to see yourself as dead because you are seeing yourself as separate from the identity of Jamie? Healing comes in many forms, and as is so often the case, you get the experience you need. I needed to understand that the egoic constructs of my identity are just that. That narrative is not my truest essence. That we are essentially more than the stories we have constructed about ourselves since birth. That we enact our lives like actors, convinced they are the character that they are actually simply playing. I was not dead. I was more alive than ever. So what is that consciousness that I describe as having the tone of a wise, compassionate teacher, which I perceive as guiding me through that experience? I imagine people who come from an absolutely non-dual perspective will see my belief that I am connecting to something outside of myself as me simply connecting to my higher self and perceiving that as other. And in one sense I agree with them, in that I do believe that we are an aspect of that source and very much connected to it. And yet, that consciousness presents as holding an understanding about the nature of the universe in ways I can barely grasp and certainly don't recall knowing. Maybe recall is the operative word here. I often feel that our lives aren't so much journeys of learning as they are journeys of remembering. Within the experience brought on by different entheogenic medicines, there seems to be different forms and degrees of connection to that consciousness. Which brings me to why I choose to explore psilocybin mushrooms, DMT or ayahuasca over, for example, 2CB. There is no one is better than the other. It's purely personal. But for me, certain medicines facilitate a deeper connection. And those are the medicines I'm more interested in. Shamanic teachings say that plant allies have their own spirit. And it is that spirit that you are connecting to. I'm interested in the parallels between spirits and the realms you meet within, and yet I also feel that any consciousness or spirit these sacred medicines allow access to are, like us, simply different aspects of the same source. Whilst in Peru, during one ayahuasca ceremony, as I lay on my mat in the Maloca, having drank the brew, colours and shapes forming in the darkness, swirling around my head, I could feel the ayahuasca coursing through my every cell, reading me. When I say reading, I mean it felt as though every life experience, from a momentary sense of childlike wonder to the biggest of traumas, was at once known by that energy, witnessed, so I could then begin the appropriate process. At the peak of that ceremony, as the sound of the shaman's icaros carried me onwards, I endured what I can only term an entheogenic operation. More real in those moments than this room is now. I found myself in this chamber, surrounded by various beings, a dialogue going on between them concerning methods of assisting the healing of this vessel is my body and mind. I had gone to Peru to do ayahuasca in part to help me move beyond a lifelong struggle with depressive episodes and anxiety. As the operation began, painful memories and suppressed emotions were drawn to the surface. The related energy extracted as a visceral goop from my cells. As this occurred, I found myself reliving those experiences, understanding why they had happened, and gaining a sense of acceptance and forgiveness towards others and towards myself. I compare it to 1,000 hours of therapy, in which there was no place for inhibition or barriers to the truest expression of self. I was being given an energetic bath to clear out pain buried deep within. It was uncomfortable, to say the least, and frightening. Yet I was clearly told that their only intention was to assist me in my healing process. There was one very calm, caring entity who was consistently in dialogue with me throughout the experience. She had a very feminine energy about her. I remember saying to her that I was afraid, and that I kind of wished I hadn't gotten into this. She replied very matter-of-factly that my fear was understandable, but we were here now, and this work needed to be done. She went on to tell me that I was being treated by an advanced science, one that worked with energy, with sound, and with the energetic remnants that my journey had left me struggling with. Although this ceremony remains one of the most intense psychedelic experiences of my life, I felt consistently loved and held within that traumatic process. During that operation, it wasn't one being, but rather many different energies who seemed to represent one energy working towards a common goal. Do I feel like they were just me connecting to my higher self? No. I believe that they inhabit what Strassman terms freestanding autonomous realities that coexist with our reality. And if something happens to change my mind, great, I'll be fascinated. As we grow and change, the things we believe often change too. If you'd met me 10, 5, even a few years ago, you would be surprised. I was still on medication for depression, and I was really caught up in my identity as someone afflicted with that. Frankly, I was the shell of the human being I am today. I'm an advocate of these medicines because I've experienced their healing potential firsthand. I talk about my healing process because my own experience is what I have the authority to share upon. But it's not just about healing and growing ourselves. It's about how, as a community, as a species, we grow and evolve. And through our experiences with these medicines, we change how we interact with other people and with the planet. There's a psychedelic revolution going on at this moment in our human journey. People are seeking these experiences more than ever, which is not to say they haven't been utilized for their healing potential for thousands of years, but rather that they are deeply needed now because of our continual destruction of this planet and each other, through our wars and the greedy reaping of our planet's resources. There is an undeniable sense of disconnect, which can be clearly witnessed by turning on the television or taking note of the political climate or the environment, by simply observing the way so many people interact with fear as the underlying energy behind their communication and perception of others, rather than with love, the most powerful force we have. This disconnect is driving people into intense periods of healing, and often they're doing this by going within, in conjunction with these medicines, using them as the vehicles they're supposed to be, to transport us to realms where deep healing and connection can occur. And depending on the medicine and the individual, where we engage with what we might call plant spirits, DMT entities, or the divine. Thank you for listening. If you would like to share your own experiences, or you have any questions, please do so in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll also be posting a link below to my Etsy shop, Infinite Spirit Arts, where I sell my handmade artwork and jewellery inspired by explorations of altered states of consciousness. Have a great day. Much love.